a bit more, sort of, for you people watching this on television, since we never do anything, taking you into account overtly, but since we started taping, you're taking into account inadvertently, continually. It affects what's going on, even though it appears to be indirect, and even though none of us seem to be adequately trained to be able to look at the camera. There surely must be a handbook about showbiz somewhere, well, up to date, to electronic media that says, you know, to ministers and politicians, that if you don't look at the camera, they're going to think you're insincere, have something to hide. Thought I was running for president there for a minute. Shifty-eyed. It's probably worse, though, than just shifty-eyed, because even a used car salesman can do that. I bet they say that if you just don't ever look at the camera, that they'll figure it's even worse. At least we were trying to verbally for a little bit look at the camera. If you remember last time while we were still doing some of this, no one's lost their place, right? That before we started sort of addressing our television audience. See, now I'm looking at the camera. I went to all the trouble, and the red light's off of this one. It's probably this one over here. I didn't come here for exercise. I had to go. Well, back before we started this, which it still fits in, we were last mentioning how it is that growth at all sorts of levels, but the only one that interests people, which is, guess what? The people level. I don't know how they guessed it, but by God, you're right. That it is all universal in, if I may say so, the most universal of senses, whereas all questions, problems, anomalies, hold on just a minute, are local. And, of course, this taping is local. Your television set is local. If you're sitting there watching it, you are, to some degree, local. But we were mentioning, for one thing, I was using an example last time of religion just being one of the most obvious, about how it is as people try to think and many people, those of you who might just be turning in tonight, this is sort of in response to letters and communiques of people that watch the show and still say they enjoy it or they find some of it interesting, but what in the hell is it all about? And as strange as it sounds, and as much as even now and then we point out, and Kyroots point out that, yes, isn't it funny that here it is, it goes on, and we're taping right now 3 times a week, and half the time you don't know what it is. And people even write and say, well, I saw one of your tapes a year ago, and you said so-and-so, I'm positive you did. And now I heard you last week, and you said just the GD opposite. Not pointing out the fact that, I started to say they're getting it free, but that's right, people pay for cable, don't they? I keep forgetting about people paying for television. But as strange as it would seem at first blush, that all this kind of activity throughout history, of course, once it becomes history, remember, you didn't think about it. Because once it becomes history, then you can name it. In fact, that somebody has named it, or it can't be part of history. But as long as it's alive at any particular time, to point out how strange it is and how hard it is to pin down and put your finger on, it's not really all that strange, trying to pick us up where we were last time, that in the religious sense, we could say this sort of activity, if you would just give me a break out in TV land, and assume it has something to do, it's trying to have something to do with the answers, with the questions that people think they have in life. The great question of, what's the meaning of life? That seems to wrap it up. And I point out that, as strange as it may sound listening to some of this, that it's not all that strange if you look at it as being some kind of response. It's actually backwards, but some kind of response, because if I told you what it was, it'd make even less sense right here in the beginning. Is that possible? Don't tempt me. That this, you could say, is in some way tied in with the great questions about what's the meaning of life. But as little as it seems to offer when people first listening, I was pointing out that we could also say with no irony whatsoever, no sarcasm, no judgment involved, that everyone who is now religious, which let's say is almost everybody in the world, starts out, and at one time, just give them credit for a split second, at one time the motivation for being religious was, what's the meaning of life? All right? Everyone, in a sense, realizes, though, that the bus trip is not going where they want it. But as one of the Kyroots pointed out tonight, the wisdom of this great interstate undertaking is such that very shortly the company has all the passengers playing parlor games and singing to such a degree, they get so involved that nobody stays upset for very long. And very long, we're talking about not very long at all. On the basis, still picking us up where we were, that let us say that the people all end up in religion. They approach religion, besides growing up in it, but that they seriously, individually approach religion somewhere, a priest, a rabbi, read a book, they try to ponder their religious teachings on the basis of what's the meaning of life. And almost immediately, it is presented to them one way or the other that, hey, you're in the right place. Another Kyroot tonight, if you notice that life and its institutions are the only, or is the only, commercial undertaking in the world, the only business that when you go in and you inquire as to the possibility of certain services you're interested in, such as, I'd like to know the meaning of life. And life immediately will just freely declare to you, we don't deal in that, we don't provide that. And yet we'll usher you in and make you a customer for life. Now the Kyroot was nice enough that it seemed to be talking about life in this undertaking rather than the kind of peckerheads that would actually go into such a place and become a customer for life. Little cheap humor there. Because once people become, let's say, religious, it's immediately revealed to them. All you got to do is go ask a sane mainstream institution, religious institution, find the Pope. If he would spend a moment with you and say, can you tell me the meaning of life, and I'll be the most faithful Catholic forever. And assuming that you catch him in a decent moment, he's going to say, oh, I don't know. And if you can keep him in a decent moment for a second, I'm just using him as a metaphorical or symbolic example, you could say, well, isn't that the purpose of the church? And he'd go, yeah. Assuming that he could think back when he first got on the bus. When he first wondered what's the meaning of life, is yeah, it is. And you say, well, doesn't it seem funny that, and by then, you and he both are back playing games, pantomime, 3 words, or you're all saying, 100 questions of beer on the wall, 100 questions of beer. That is, you end up being a part of an organization for a purpose that the organization will, in a sense, freely admit, no, we can't provide this service. And you end up with the thing of, well, thank God I'm home. Exactly what I'm looking for, which you can say, wait a minute, it's exactly what you're not looking for. I mean, you came to them and said, do you know the meaning of life? Is that the purpose of this institution? And in a sense, they go, yes. In fact, life doesn't even have to say that. If you're saying you don't really question whether that's the nature, that's why all the statues, and you don't even have to go to Rio, especially if you start out dead. But he's standing up there. And you don't really have to ask, do you know the meaning of life? And it just tacitly, he just smiles. Unless you get real specific for a split second and say, well, and you find somebody, not the institution perhaps, but somebody, or you find their manual where it says, important questions that novices sometimes ask. And you look under there and it says, does anybody here know the meaning of life? And it says, no. Please move on. And so But if you're ordinary, sane, religious, you end up in an organization that you sought out for one purpose. And if there's one question that they will say we don't know the answer to, it's the one that brought you there. And yet, you've got to realize this by now. This is what the Kyroot meant by, in a short period of time, it's got the passengers involved with parlor games amongst themselves and singing along, and everybody very quickly gets over being upset over the fact that they're on the bus and they ask around, where's this going? And no matter where it's going, it's not where you wanted to go. That is, it doesn't have the answer, but very shortly, you're proud to be a member of this splendid organization. Which amongst, at least you know for a fact, maybe some other institution, Maybe the Rhode Island School of Cartooning. Maybe some organization somewhere knows the secret of life. The church does not. So that's the one you picked out. If you're sane and ordinary, and you're just proud to be there. I'm here to know the meaning of life. And this business says, you came to the right place because we don't know. And it's like you hug each other and you think, oh. Now, use religion, trying to get us back to date, there is still, at least anybody really gets misled, how about psychiatry? They try to put a certain spin, but if you pick out the institution of psychiatric care, treatment, again, assume they're mainstream. We're not talking about some renegade psychiatrist that's on TV trying to collect money, thinking he's a minister or something. Anyway, mainstream psychiatry, if you go into a psychiatrist and you say, what I want to know is the meaning of life, or what I want to know is why I'm like I am, which is all the same thing. And he goes, well, in a sense they're saying, well, welcome. I'm here, I'm trained, here's all his credentials. He's like saying welcome, like the great statues of Buddha and Jesus and Abraham, if there was one. Of course, Buddha, really not doing that. He's laying there, and you're supposed to assume that if he was awake, that he'd be glad to see you. No, the man had a busy life. At any rate, if you were in mainstream psychiatry as an institution, which is as true, as stable, as formidable, I shouldn't say that. Kyroots made me say it. It's not formidable, for those of you that own a dictionary. Impressive, useful, acceptable. Psychiatry nowadays, at certain levels, is just as much so, all those adjectives, as religion. But at any rate, if you approach an institution of psychiatry, if there was a pope of psychiatry, and you say, well, what I want to know is the meaning of life, which is to say who I am. They do this. They don't have to say that or you wouldn't be there. We'll assume that you're part of the mainstream and you went and sought out a psychiatrist. You're not going in for a sales pitch. In the same sense I was using the religious example, you wouldn't go to the church for a sales pitch. You simply go there and you say, I want to know the meaning of life, but you already assume, more or less, you've already assumed that they're decent, sane institutions, religion and psychiatry. But if you were more driven toward psychiatry, you go there and you already have the feeling like, yes, no, you want a little assurance from the specific guy, like a specific minister. But you go to a specific psychiatrist and you meet him. He seems to be decent. He's dressed up, got a nice suit, haircut, nice office. And you say, what I want is to know the meaning of life, to know the meaning of me. Come in, my boy. But then for a split second, before you really get tied up with the singing of the 99 bottles of Neurosis on the wall and playing parlor game, if you ask him for a split second and you and he both were in some kind of unusual moment of clarity, and you said, well, if I come here, in the same way if I join for the church, if I come here faithfully, will I get the meaning of life from you? He's going to say, well, certainly not. In other words, will I succeed? Will this institution provide what it is I'm wanting? You know what it is I want. In a sense, the tacit part is they're saying, we not only know what you want, we're part of it, we wouldn't be here. It takes two the institution wouldn't be here unless people wanted what we provide. That's what I mean by this. So you say, all right, just for a second. I'm already sold. I'm going to start. Here's my first. I'll pay in advance. I'll be here every week. But will I learn the secret of me, the secret of life? And again, assuming this ephemeral moment of clarity, he'll say, well, certainly not. And then you go, oh. And then you'll hug each other. Just so that none of you took the religion part personally, it's the same thing. And so you end up then perhaps as faithful as a good parishioner in a church that you go to your analytic session once, twice, whatever times a week, year in and year out, on the basis that for a second your original question was, will this explain me to me? And the answer is, if it's a sane part of the institution of psychiatric care, the answer is, well, certainly not. And then it's gone. And then you and the institution, you and life, are going, oh, God, what a lucky break that I found this. To push on a little bit with that, the thing is, from a different kind of view, now I'm assuming you people out there, that I'm not totally wasting this time, that you're beyond the point of being real sarcastic or taking this absolutely as some attack on psychiatry, religion, or anything. But if you only look with two eyes, that's all you can see. There's got to be one or the other. But now consider, if you could see beyond two directions at once without going blind, laughing, or getting pissed, annoyed. Consider this. Once you do, as you should if you're ordinary, once you do join up with a group, which everyone does, even hermits. But once you join up with a group, a church, a religion, take up psychiatry, you become a member, habitual attendee at a bar, that you and some group of people are playing out some kind of, you assume, I guess, some higher level of the Cheers show. Or that you just have one other person that you talk to. You join up with a group. I'll put it another way, you adopt, finally, very shortly, you adopt the collective thinking of your time. You are sane. You grow up. You accept the institutions of religion, psychiatry, whatever it is, or else you reject them, which is no different. But you accept the collective thinking that's going on. You accept the institution of whatever it is, all the way from religion to the neighborhood bar. Same thing. But once you do this, it's inescapable. You no longer want to reach, you no longer want to push to the farthest reaches of your mind, which is what you were trying to do originally. You lose it. You no longer want to go to the furthest reaches of the mind. You then are only interested in what the group's activity is. And yet, you do not notice. You're not supposed to. It's not a trick. There's nothing wrong. That is what the Kyroot tonight was inferring behind the idea that in its wisdom, the bus company. All the passengers, at 1 second, they understand the bus is not going where I want it. That is, you got on the bus and your feeling was to push it beyond religion and psychiatry. You go on the bus and your feeling is, of course, getting on the bus is being alive in a sense, but you're on the bus and without really asking, because all you got to do is sit down and the bus goes. I mean, there's a guy up there driving with a suit on, a uniform. Assuming he read his card this morning, he can pull it off. You don't think about just people like priests wearing funny suits. How about life? Life wears a funny suit. You just don't recognize it. I can always get some of you to laugh if I start talking about priest and how can you take something seriously that you go and you want to know the secret of life, and there's a grown man wearing a dress and funny clothes and pick out other religions, it's not just Catholicism. That seems easy, but life dresses up real peculiar. You just don't notice it. You're too used at ground level to look around at people and thinking, boy, why do those people wear hats indoors, or why do these people put marks on their forehead? What the hell does that have to do with anything? That's child's play. Life dresses real funny every day, and you just don't notice it. Of course, in a sense, if you're ordinary, it's just as well, because if you did and you laughed out loud, some of you would probably get about 20 pounds of duck knocked out of you by life. So. You began singing and dancing on the bus very shortly after being on the bus. And the original idea, again, tacit, was this, that you're there on the bus and there's a guy driving. There's always somebody driving this vehicle. Whether you're in a church, a synagogue, a psychiatrist's office, just in a city, just in civilization. If you got no interest in psychiatry religion, you would feel like, well, the government. That's your bus. The government. You feel like, well, that's the driver. Or if you were getting a little more non-material, I guess you could feel like, well, some kind of collective wisdom of the cosmos drives life. Everyone accepts the fact that there's somebody driving. And I don't mean God. You can be an atheist. But the feeling is still that somebody's driving. Or you wouldn't get up in the morning. You wouldn't have to get up and worry about what's life about. You would be so frightened you couldn't get out of bed. Literally. Because if nothing else, I could get an ordinary person that could be an atheist, vehemently anti-psychiatric, and they would still have to admit that they do believe there's a driver. Because if it got down to it, they'd say, well, me. My own intelligence, my own ego, my own aggression, my own hostility. If it wasn't for that, I couldn't live. So everyone, there is a tacit belief, acceptance, that there is a driver on the bus. It's this. And so you're there. But you almost immediately find out when you say, well, I'd like to know the answer to life. In other words, that's where you're hoping the bus goes. And one way or the other, just very shortly, you find out the bus ain't going there. And it doesn't matter who you are. You could say, well, wait a minute, there is 15 billion people. Somebody wants to go somewhere that the bus is going. That ain't the way it works. Each person, wherever you want to go, the bus is not going exactly there. Well, if it is going there, I'll put it this way, it's a short trip because you're on the way to the graveyard. That's the only way it's going to go where you want it to go. And that's going to be a short trip. It's like they're going to say, well, you have lung cancer, you'll be dead in 2 weeks. And you think, well, finally the bus is going where I want it to go. That is, somewhere that I can predict. Not just the doctor, now you predicted. If he says, do you believe me, sir? You say, well, yes, I do. All right, now it's going where you want to go. But other than that, the bus is not going. The trip is not going where anybody wants it to go. You understand? And so immediately you have to accept. Somebody turns around and says, you want to play charades? You want to sing? And sure enough, you do. Now back to where I was trying to point out. As is proper, as is being in part raised and instructed by city institutions, which everyone must be, you must join up a group. Even if it's the Hermits Association, even if you guys never meet, you join up some group if you're sane. That is, you adopt the collective thinking of some organization. Because if you're alive and ordinary, you're not original. You don't start that way. You're a plagiarist. And so even if you're a hermit, and if you say, I don't join a group, don't tell me that crap, I'm a hermit. You're a plagiarist, or you wouldn't know anything about hermits. If you're a true hermit, you'd be an original. But you wouldn't know you're a hermit if I said, what are you? You'd think, what the hell kind of question is, what are you? Now you'd be close to being an original, but you cannot start there. You've got to start out as a plagiarist. That's why everybody on the bus thinks kids, get out of my way. Think about it. Except those of you with children and are ordinary. I know ordinary people think, wait a minute, that's not funny. But the man wrote in and asked if we were ever going to say exactly what we mean by family. Kyroots answered it. Those of you who were listening earlier. Once you join up a group, once you adopt the thinking of life, some aspect of it, then the original question not only is gone, pacified, as it should be. You no longer have any interest, or the interest you had, which I was exemplifying by the common questions of I don't know the meaning of life. What you're trying to do is to reach inside of you, is to reach the furthest possible limits of the intellect. But as soon as you join up, and it doesn't matter what, it's not the church's fault, it's not psychiatrist's fault, it's not some particular religion's fault within inside religion, it's nobody's fault. But as soon as you're grown, as soon as your mind is wound up, you're a plagiarist. That is, you're a reasonable, healthy child of the free-singing generations. You're continuing to sing the praises. Yea, team. Tonight Kyroots called a team, it seemed to be that the cheerleaders were exhorting on the great efforts of efficiency high. It's life. Because as soon as you have adopted and become sane, you have adopted someone else's thinking, life's thinking, the collective wisdom, or rejected it, but as soon as you have adopted it, you are no longer distracted, in the ordinary sense, by trying to reach the furthest limits of your mind, then it's become manageable. Because now your interest is not in your own mind and its possibilities. Your interest now is, well, what's the group up to? What's the church up to? The psychiatrist says, besides the ordinary, our scheduled sessions here twice a week, you might be interested. I am next weekend going to hold a 2-day retreat up in the Poconos for some of my select patients, including you, at the small price of $2,500. And it gets your attention. Regardless of the fact you might say, well, now I've been spending, whatever it is, $200 a day twice a week with you, and we already ascertained that what I wanted from psychiatry you told me I couldn't get. And let's assume that you can both return for a split second to that moment of unnatural clarity that you experience as the Siamese brothers, your own version, earlier when he goes, well, that's true. And you're thinking, well, and so now for an additional $2,500 for 2 days, if I come there and meet you, am I assured that I won't get any closer to the answers than I will from a regular session? He said, oh, that's guaranteed. And you might go, okay, will you take a check? This is not just funny, and it's certainly not sarcastic. That is the nature of it. That is busy work. That is the eternal building fund in the down-home Protestant churches I was pointing out. And it's not that something's wrong. It's not to point out that one of these TV evangelists, I assume everybody gets it, since all of you are not down-home Protestant folks, naturally. I hate it. But it is simply, it's them saying, constantly, we got to have more money to build a new wing. And you could say, if you're ordinary, you say, well, based on the kind of stuff you're talking about, that is true. I see what they're up to. It's that these guys are not really godly. They're not religious. They don't know what they're doing. And so to keep from having to face up to the fact, to finally come out one day and go, I got to confess, I don't know what I'm doing. So they don't have to do that. They keep saying, we've got to have more money. We've got to build a new hospital. We've got to build a new wing on our church. And so they just keep doing this so that they never have to get around to it. Or psychiatrist. He keeps saying, well, what's on your mind today? He punches a clock and here it goes, $200 for 50 minutes. And you could say, well, what do you mean what's going on? I told you 4 years ago when I came here, the first day, and we talked, when you didn't charge me anything. You remember that 10 minutes you gave me free? Yes. And I said, well, I've left my religion, and there's lost interest, and what I still want to know, what's the meaning of life? Why are people like they are? And the psychiatrist, again, let's play this lucid moment. He says, you mean you want to know why you're like you are? You're not just in groups of people, are you? He goes, Jesus. A moment of unnatural clarity. And the psychiatrist says, I'm surprised too. And he says, yes, that's it. I just wanted you to see right quick that it's not just religions. It's not just ministers saying we've got to keep raising more money and they never get around to, hey, what's the meaning of life? Psychiatrists is the same way. There you lay after 4 years and he comes in. If you lay there a few minutes and you don't say anything, he's going to probably say, well, you're awfully quiet today. And you might think, Jesus, for 4 years, I've been here paying you more than I'd had to pay if I'd stayed in church, by the way. But I'm here, and I told you what I wanted to know was what makes me like I am. What I want to know was the secret of life. And you keep stalling. Except he doesn't say, well, we need a new building fund. The psychiatrist goes, what's new? What's on your mind? And you can say, well, what's on my mind is what I told you 4 years ago. I want to know why are people like they are? What do you want to know? How more of you want to know? Do you understand? It's busy work. It is the continual building fund. But it's not that either one of those institutions or any other aspect of life is engaged in a fraud. What it is that the original question of what's the meaning of life, no institution is set up to answer. But rather than you being faced with this, that you go in and say, well, you try a church, you know the secret? They go, nope. You say, well, one down. Then you go to a psychiatrist. They don't know. Then you start going to, you find the president of a university and just ask him in general. Nope. And you think, well, Jesus, by then I assume you'd be getting desperate if you were sane at all. Then you try the chemistry department, the physics department. God, I guess you got desperate. You could go over and try, lit department. Does anybody know the meaning of life? Think what a disappointment. Think how disturbed you would be. The easy way out. You ask, what's the meaning of life? An institution. Life itself says, we don't know. Hi there. And there you are, sleeping with a room full of drunken sailors. How dare you point that out? In other words, you're on the bus having a hell of a good time, unless every now and then if somebody, which I don't know why someone would stoop this low if they were that smart, they couldn't, but say, do you realize originally, I was here on the bus, I was sitting next to you about 20 years ago, and you were mad as a boiled owl when you found out this bus wasn't going where you wanted it to. And the man go, God, you're right. Let's sing some more, quick. See, you're providing your own continual building fund. Don't blame it on preachers, don't blame it on psychiatry, you have to keep looking off. You as is necessary. You lose the interest in pushing your mind to its furthest limits, and your interest becomes very localized. That is, what's going on with the group? Psychiatry, religion, the Hermits Association. Boy, I hope they don't try to have a meeting this year. I'll quit, sure as hell. And if all that seems too expansive, it's you. It's you as exemplified by people who write in and say, I like the sound of something that you talk about, that I was pointing out, but the whole point of them writing is for them to point out to me, yeah, but you're not going to take me in. Disregarding, or as they say in New Jersey, irregardless of the fact that I haven't asked to take them in, We haven't solicited anything. I hadn't asked anybody to believe it. I hadn't asked to write and tell me what you think. We hadn't asked anything. And they'll still send in, I like a lot of what you say since it agrees with some of what I already thought. But let me tell you this, Mr. Smart Aleck, you're not going to sucker me in. The reason I brought that again, do you understand? That's the same thing on a very local level, an individual level. That's your own eternal building drive. That you stay involved now with your own religion, your own psychiatry, your own group activity, and therefore you don't have to worry about, I start out wanting to push my mind to its furthest limits, which let's say just for the sake of argument, that in a sense that's what strikes them when they hear this. But where does it normally go? Nowhere. It'll go far enough for them to write a letter, and what they're saying in a sense is, I still would like to push my mind to its furthest limits every now and then. It's like a flashback of that momentary clarity. But wait a minute. I just want to point this out to you. And then the part I'm saying, quoting many of the letters, that you're not going to sucker me. I want you to know, hey, I don't join nothing. What they're saying then is their own building drive as well. What's the group doing? What's the activity now? They can continue on a very local level. On an individual level, the human nervous system is arranged in such a way as you can continually distract yourself so that you don't blame it or think with other people, well, wait a minute, churches, priests, rabbis, politicians, they're distracting people, especially ministers, because they'll say, well, we got to have more money, and they keep getting people involved, or say, well, shame on you people doing so-and-so. And the poor people start out wanting to know the secret of life, and they're getting food. Forget that. If you're that kind of person, you're too smart for all that crap, okay? You're sitting there by yourself, thinking all of it by yourself. You don't see it. You're your own group. At city level, you're your own distractor. As soon as you say, hey, I'm not falling for that crap, you're saying, I would like to push my mind, but wait a minute. You ain't going to push it. Pushing your own mind. There were 2 Kyroots tonight that mentioned that, about the man laying under the sly tree and the man in the library. The man in the library mused, trying to instruct your own mind, that is, trying to teach yourself, is like trying to put, Kyroot cleaned up an aspect of an old Louisiana philosopher, classical philosopher, but the man pointed out trying to teach yourself, trying to inform your own mind is not unlike trying to put 20 pounds of ducks in a 10-pound chicken bag. That's the distraction. The other one was, Kyroots pointed out, that there's a kind of intellectual incest, which is not a crime, because that's the only form of mental intercourse that people can do at the library level, regardless of the fact that the sign says no musing or incesting. Those of you who have noticed, there are libraries on wheels too.